Almost certainly too little, too late, but the Giants had a very fun weekend as they swept the playoff contending Philadelphia Phillies out of town. A lot of good vibes at the ballpark. We'll get into it next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about a lot of different things that happened over the weekend as the Giants swept the Philadelphia Phillies out of town. Just a great weekend all the way around. It started off with Alex Cobb setting the tone in game one and the offense. They won 13-1, I believe was the final score. And Alex Cobb was the big takeaway from that game for me, though, because the normalization of his numbers is happening before our eyes. Because when the season started, through his first 7 starts, Alex Cobb had a 6.25 ERA, and myself and other Giants reporters wouldn't shut up about how the peripheral numbers were much better. At that point in time, he had a 2.75 fielding independent pitching, a 2.40 expected fielding independent pitching. I just want to make the point that in his next 15 starts after that point, his ERA was 2.61. And what does that match up with? It matches up with what the peripherals were through his first 7 starts, and that's when we say the peripherals are better at predicting future ERA than past ERA in a small sample. And so on the season now, Alex Cobb has a very respectable 3.58 earned run average, but the peripherals still suggest that that's much higher than even what he quote-unquote has deserved. So my main point here is that Alex Cobb has had a really good season. It's great to see it come full circle for him and normalize. That's why in small samples, we look at the peripheral underlying numbers, and it also is great for the future because Alex Cobb is signed for next year, and Alex Cobb, there's a club option for the year after that. So he's looking like one of the better free agent signings in general from the offseason, and certainly for starting pitchers. He is going to be 35 in October, but still career high in velocity, and it's just been a really solid year, even though it didn't start out that way. Ground ball machine, strikes guys out at an above average rate and then gets ground balls and keeps the ball down, hence ground balls. But the average launch angle is very low. Home run prevention is a byproduct of that, so he's elite at that. So it's great to see. I'm glad that things have kind of turned around for him. And then someone who's not under team control for the next couple of years or even next year at all is Carlos Rodón. And he goes out and just has this awesome performance in the finale on Sunday. Another 10 strikeout game culminated with an inning in which he stranded the bases loaded, struck out 3 in the inning, 2 with the bases loaded against the Phillies there. And the second strikeout of the inning was his 200th on the season. And the third was his 10th strikeout of the game, and it gave him 9 double-digit strikeout games on the season, which matches the most in Giants franchise history. So ultimately, what a great acquisition Carlos Rodón has been. I remember the title from when the Giants signed Rodón was that the Giants signed a potential ace in Carlos Rodón. And he is, in fact, an ace. You can make a case he's the best pitcher in the game. I mean, okay, that's a little bit extreme, but when you look at FanGraphs wins above replacement leaders for pitchers, he is number 1. And funnily, I don't know what the right word is here, but Kevin Gausman is actually number 2. But the thing to point out here is that FanGraphs wins above replacement for pitchers is based on FIP. It's not based on like actual results. FIP is kind of more theoretical. I mentioned those numbers for Cobb. the FIP was the number we were saying, hey, that's more indicative of maybe what he's deserved. So for Rodón, he's got the 2.92 ERA, but the FIP is 2.34. So if it was a WAR-based, if the WAR number was based on actual ERA, he wouldn't be number one, but he'd still be excellent. So for Rodón, I mean, what more can you say? He's got a 31.7% strikeout rate, which is the best in the National League. And he's got this $22.5 million club option for player option that triggered when he reached 110 innings. And so, yes, you have Cobb coming back. Yes, Logan Webb is under team control for a few more years. Alex Wood, who has an injury, we'll talk about that a little bit later. He's under contract for next year. Anthony DeSclafani under contract for 2 more years, and Jacob Junis under club control for 1 year via arbitration. But all of that said, I don't think that they can afford to let Carlos Rodón walk out the door. There's one exception, and that's if they go out and get, a Jacob deGrom on a 2-year, $90 million deal or something. Like, I think you need to replace his front of the rotation production, because even with it, they're like a 500-ish team. And so it'll be hard to get better than that if you let him leave, and then you still have to bring back that production and then some. So there's not a lot of frontline guys out there, and he's one of them. And it's just been a great addition. And we've been critical of the front office at times, and fans have, certainly. And on the position player side, there's definitely they didn't do enough to, in free agency to bolster the position player side. But they've done a good job on the pitching side, and specifically the rotation. I mean, Gausman is a huge success story, and now Rodón is the latest. So what an awesome effort, and finishing off the sweep. And it was just electric. Sellout crowd or close to it when he got those last few strikeouts, and he was pumped up. I mean, the way he walked off the mound, he doesn't like hitters, and it shows, and you just kind of love the fire and the whole act, and then the green apples in the dugout. I mean, come on, how can you not love Carlos Rodón at this point? So anyway, in just a minute, we turn to the more unfortunate side of the weekend. Some of it was known, but a lot of injury updates. We had a couple of surgeries that just took place, including to a franchise legend. So we'll get into all of these injury updates momentarily. But first, as you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonmlb. That's linkedin.com/lockedonmlb to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, as promised, we're going to talk about injuries. Injuries are a part of every year, but it's certainly been a big part of 2022 for the Giants. And the injury to Brandon Belt and the fact that he just wasn't able to really produce at all this season is one of the more significant reasons why it's been a disappointing year for the Giants. Belt last year, in just 97 games, put up 3.4 Fangraphs wins above replacement, which is just phenomenal. That's a good season, and to do it in less than 100 games means that when you're on the field, you're producing like one of the better players in the game, and he did. He had a 157 weighted runs created plus, 57 percentage points above league average offensively, had 29 home runs. He had never hit 20, hit 29 last year in 97 games, 378 on base percentage. And the year before that, in 2020, he put up 2 Fangraphs wins above replacement in 51 games. So if you combine that, that's less than 162 games and 5.4 wins above replacement according to Fangraphs. Different sites have their own calculations for wins above replacement. Just an all-encompassing number, combines defense, base running, and hitting, including an adjustment based on what position you play. So the bar is higher when you play a less quote unquote important position as first base. If you do this same offensive production as a shortstop, it's even more valuable, is what I'm trying to say. And that's factored into this number. So any way you put it, the last couple years when he was on the field, he was extremely good. And this year he wasn't able to be on the field. And when he was on the field, he was not extremely good. So he was compromised and he ended up deciding to undergo knee surgery. It's a arthroscopic right knee surgery. He had it done in San Francisco with Dr. Ken Akazuki. I'm reading really small text here as I try to see this, but the results are it was a successful surgery and he had it, and the recovery time is about 8 weeks. And so this raises all kinds of questions like, will Brandon Belt play again? And more relevant to us, maybe not to him, but to Giants fans, is will he play for the Giants again? And if not, it is sad that there was very little fanfare or no fanfare to whatever would be his final appearance on the field for the Giants, because we didn't know that this was going to happen. But sadly, that's often how these things go. And we've been fortunate to see like the finale of great careers like Matt Cain, just by way of example, when it's their last game and you get to send them off. So for Belt, it very much could be the last. He may never wear the Giants uniform again. Although I would hope maybe they would do the 1-day contract, let him retire as a Giant, all that. But if it is, I mean, we'll talk about that at the time and give him the credit he deserves. He's one of the better first basemen in franchise history, and he's just been underrated and good and consistent. Well, no, he's not very consistent. He's very streaky, but he's always been a good player when he's been on the field for the most part. A couple of down years here and there, this one among them. Goofy guy, captain, all that stuff last year was a ton of fun. So we'll save the kind of waxing poetic about Belt. But the fact is he had season-ending surgery. Even if the Giants pull off a miracle and make the playoffs, he's not going to be in it. And maybe he could appear in the World Series. But come on, let's be realistic. So he's done for the year, and he's a free agent at the end of the year. And there's no qualifying offer or anything like that. They wouldn't give it to him anyway because he's not coming off this year. You're not going to give that kind of money to a guy or offer that kind of money to a guy. So anyway, Brandon Belt out for the year. Could be the last time we see him in a Giants uniform, which would be sad. So also, José Álvarez, lefty reliever, had Tommy John surgery and is going to miss all of 2023. So that's a big blow for him personally. He's a free agent at the end of the year. Kind of another example of one of these bullpen guys for the Giants who was really good last year, but just wasn't the same this year. Obviously was dealing with an injury. And he's a free agent at the end of the year. I can't remember if I said that already, but it probably ends his Giants career. At least certainly they're not going to sign him in this offseason. But he was a good Giant, very good reliever last year. He was on a $1.5 million deal this year, so it's not like backbreaking. But just wanted to pass along that he had successful Tommy John surgery. Now, one of the more significant injuries here is that Alex Wood goes on the injured list with left shoulder impingement that he started dealing with on August 14th. So it's a recent issue, and Alex Wood has given up 19 runs since that time. And so he really was struggling over the last few weeks, over his last few starts. So this explains that. He does end up with a 5.10 ERA. The peripherals are better. Fielding independent pitching of 3.77. All of the other peripheral numbers kind of fall in line with something in the high threes as opposed to in the fives. And so it may be the last time he throws this season. It may not make sense to try to rush him back. It probably will depend. If the Giants, I've said this before, but look, nothing is stopping you from going on a miraculous run here. And we've seen teams occasionally, last year's Cardinals, they go off and win 16 games in a row. So if the Giants can win 16 games in a row, maybe Alex Cobb does pitch again this year. But they have a tough schedule. They're now going to play the Dodgers. They play the Dodgers a couple more times. They play the Braves, I think, twice. No, just one. No, they already played their road series against the Braves. So they play the Dodgers twice, the Braves, the Padres. So it's a tough schedule the rest of the way. In which case, I would imagine Alex Wood will likely not pitch again this year. So if it's the last time he pitches, it was a disappointing year for Alex Wood coming off of the season he had last year, although the peripheral numbers are not very different. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, the numbers overall look different, the results numbers, but everything else kind of looks as expected. And so I would think a new year next year, let the shoulder impingement. I don't know exactly what the outlook is for that, but it doesn't sound like it's too serious if they're considering he could be back at some point this year. But let him come back. He's under contract for next year. It'd be the last year of his deal, and a better defense behind him. I think it could be a better bounce back type of season for Alex Wood. So anyway, those are the injury updates. There's also Joey Bart is still in concussion protocol, but is going to increase baseball activities over the weekend. And so obviously the weekend is past. And typically these things don't take too long, about a week. That's why the concussion IL is a week. So hopefully Bart is okay and we can see him play down the stretch and let him kind of continue to build off the positive momentum he's had since getting called back up from the minor leagues. That's basically it for the injury updates. But the Giants rosters expanded on September 1st, and we talked about traded for Lewis Brinson, and they also then called up Bryce Johnson. And so Brinson and Johnson, and just the fact that the Giants have a 28-man roster right now has really changed the dynamic of the team. And let's not forget, they had 28-man rosters all of last season. And so I think that that's kind of under the radar, a big reason why this season wasn't as successful. So we'll get into that and a little bit of a taste of Aaron Judge's free agency. He talked with John Shea of the Chronicle, and we'll get into that momentarily. But first, all right, as promised, we're going to just kind of wrap this thing up and discuss the difference with the Giants roster having a couple of extra roster spots. It's unbelievable. Gabe Kapler, he's like in his wheelhouse when the Giants have a 28-man roster and more ability to pinch hit and get matchups. And in individual innings, they can just pinch hit after pinch hit after pinch hit. And especially with that rule for relievers not being allowed to be taken out until they faced 3 hitters, the Giants can take advantage. And that's what we saw last year so much. And we've thought about this before, but seeing it expand to 28, it just really dawned on me how much of an impact I think that that's had. When you don't have everyday players performing well, as the Giants haven't this year. Last year, like I just talked about with Belt, he was an everyday player when he was on the field, and he was a very good one. Brandon Crawford was an everyday player and finished 4th in MVP voting. Buster Posey was an everyday player. For the most part, it was like 2 days on, 1 day off all season long, and he was a very good one. Also, Chris Bryant, when he came here, he was an everyday player, more or less. And so they didn't get that this year, but also they had a smaller roster. And so when you have the bigger roster, it gives you a bigger bench, is essentially the simple way to put it. And when you have a bigger bench, there's more opportunities to pinch hit. And they take advantage in like individual innings when there's, a shaky reliever on the mound, and you can just go with 4 straight pinch hitters. And that's what Gabe Kapler did in the inning in which the Giants scored the go-ahead run in the middle game of the series. 4 straight pinch hitters, and I think that the Giants' offense, it just makes a big difference specifically for this team, and I think that they can take advantage almost more than any other team, and that's what we saw all of last year. So I think a couple of underrated factors for this season not going as hoped. The smaller roster sizes with a roster of platoon players. And then also the baseball or the humidor, whatever it is, the ball has behaved differently this year and fewer home runs. And I think that the Giants were a team, they didn't have like superstar sluggers like Aaron Judge, but they had just a bunch of guys who hit the ball in the air and could hit it pretty decently in the air. And pretty much anything hit decently in the air was a home run under this crazy fun ball. But this year, that's not true. You really got to get a hold of it. And so I think that the players that they kind of selected, think Lamont Wade, think Mike Yastrzemski, these are not guys with huge power, but able to hit home runs. And they hit a lot more last year than they're going to end up hitting this year. So I just wanted to point those two things out. It's an underlying theme to underlying cause, maybe two of them, for what's gone wrong this year. But with that said, Lewis Brinson made his Giants debut. Bloop hit in his first at bat. He also hit a rocket double as the first of those 4 straight pinch hitters. So setting up a winning rally, essentially. And clearly they're platooning him. So he didn't start in either of the first 2 games against right-handed starters. But against a lefty, Ranger Suarez, on Sunday, he did start. And then the pinch hitting was against lefties primarily, and then being used for defense. So again, that works much better when you have a 28-man roster. If you have a 26-man roster, it's harder to carry these like weak side platoon players. They already have one in Austin Slater. I think they're using Brinson essentially in that same way, but he's just, now you got 2 of them. And Brinson just really, really has hit left-handed pitching in the minors this year. Not as impressive against right-handed pitching. Small samples, of course, when we're looking at single-season platoon splits, but the numbers are eye-popping. So, he's looked solid in his first few games with the Giants. Last thing I want to say is this John Shea in the Chronicle interview with Aaron Judge. I just found this quote to be compelling. The interview was mostly about the home run chase and just his Bay Area roots. I mean, I don't think he's per se from the Bay Area, more Central Valley, right? But he grew up a huge Giants fan. And John Shea asked him essentially about growing up dreaming that he would one day play for the Giants. And Judge said, quote, "Oh yeah, it was for any kid growing up in the Central Valley, especially my hometown, a big Giants community. Everybody I went to school with was a Giants fan. So that's one thing you always dreamed about. But," there's a but that all went out the window when my name got called and I got a chance to play in New York. You can dream as a little 12-year-old, end quote. So the rumors are already flying. I believe while recording this podcast, Aaron Judge hit another home run. I think that gives him 54 on the season. So he's very likely, or at least it's very probable, that he'll end up with over 60 home runs, potentially breaking Roger Maris's American League record of 61. And what a season to be heading into free agency for Judge. And what a time for the Giants to probably have interest in Judge. Now, do I think it's likely that the Giants end up with Judge? No. Do I think it's possible? Yes, it's possible. People want to say, oh, they won't spend the money. They have only, if Rodón opts out, which he certainly will unless he gets hurt here in the last month, then they have only $66.5 million committed to next year's team. So could you add a $35 million a year player? Yeah, you could, and you'd only be at $100 million on next year's team. And this year they're at 162 or something, and the year before that 162 or something. So you could certainly do it. It's not like it's impossible. It's different if you're like a team that won't go over the luxury tax and you're already right at the line and you're stuck with a bunch of contracts that put you there. Giants are not stuck. They can reimagine their roster. That's called the financial flexibility, which is different than like a willingness to increase payroll. Flexibility means you get, let's just say, even though they claim it's not true, but let's just say ownership is like a hard stop at 165. That's it. You can't go over it, which I don't think is true, but let's just say it was. You're still at $66.5 million going into the offseason. And so you could absolutely add a $35 million a year salary and have room to continue to add. This number, $66.5 million, is not factoring in anybody's arbitration or pre-arbitration estimates because those are not guaranteed. You are guaranteed to at least hand out a bunch of league minimum salaries, so I guess we probably should think of it that way. But when all is said and done, they absolutely could add an Aaron Judge, even if there was a hard cap on the spending. The question is, will they? He is 31. That is the one thing. If he was like 27, then I would say, yes, it's going to happen. and back up the Brinks trucks because they need it. They recognize, I think, that they need an infusion of upper tier talent. So we're just going to have to wait and see. But I thought that these quotes, courtesy of John Shea of the Chronicle, were worth passing along. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Now make your second listen the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022, an 8-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the upcoming NFL season. The local team experts of the Locked On Podcast Network, plus a betting angle from Lee Sterling of Locked On Bets, all combined into one ultimate NFL preview. Search for Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance, and thank you to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Giants versus Dodgers tonight, and also mailbag questions that we're going to continue to get to throughout the week. A lot of good ones as we wind down the season and get ready for the offseason. So thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.